Ladies and gentlemen, we are now entering the presentation session. There are two speakers. The first speaker is Mr. Ziv Ragowsky, an MBA from INSET. He is a consultant in the field of sustainability and also an agricultural technology enthusiast. Some of his work, a consultant in McKinsey & Co., CEO of Maha Microfinance for Agriculture, Myanmar, board member of Blue Number, and focus also with Government of Indonesia, Bappenas, on agricultural innovation in palm oil. He will be presenting the concept of global framework of principle for sustainable palm oil. Mr. Ziv Ragowsky, you have about 20 minutes, please.
So first of all, I would like to thank CPOPC for the trust in me in this presentation, and obviously the Dr. Yusuf Basiron for his trust, the rest of the CPOPC team, including Padupito, Yupawichak, and others as well. Thank you also for the distinguished representative of the Indonesian and Malaysian government and the other countries in the audience today. Agus Prabo, thank you very much for your excellent presentation, and for the speaker after me, Dr. Shatardu, as well. Thank you very much for that. So to share a bit about what is this global framework principles for palm oil sustainability that we have gathered here today to discuss, thank you very much again for listening. As such, as was mentioned earlier, the importance of this initiative by CPOPC is such that, as we all well know, and was mentioned a couple of times in the last sets of discussion presentations before, this one is the fact that with the world population continuing to grow, the demand for all vegetable oils will continue to grow, but specifically the demand for CPO will grow even faster. And as such, it is important to address some of the concerns by the European Union and others around the sustainability of palm oil. What has been clear so far is that one of the bigger problems around addressing these issues raised by the EU and whatnot is that we are lacking a common language to actually have that discussion, essentially. What is important to start with when we talk about palm oil is that palm oil, amongst other things, is a huge instrument for the development, specifically of the developing countries that are producing the palm oil. And this is what CPOPC is trying to drive as part of the discussion, which is super important. Why is that important? We know that palm oil is a significant economic drivers, both around being able to stimulate agribusinesses, both in terms of palm oil and the businesses around it, starting from upstream in rural areas to downstream export hubs. This is specifically important because palm oil, as opposed to other commodities, requires, as you very well know, require the processing within country itself. So it leaves significantly more value within the country producing it than other types of commodity as such. In addition, it is a significant job drivers and a source of income, as we heard earlier, for over 3 million farmers and the resulting families and the resulting ecosystem that they're driving as well. Furthermore, the palm oil produced is a commodity that is specifically sought after globally. And as we've heard a bit earlier, and as we know now, at the price point of today, it is a huge contribution to the GDP of these developing countries. Even though, or not even though, but especially in this time of a pandemic where the global economy actually needs both this form of relatively cheap vegetable oil as well as the developing country needs sources of income. And finally, and this is an element that is often not very well discussed, is the idea that palm oil specifically focuses a lot, because of the nature of leveraging the local economy and whatnot, on the development of that local economy. And many of the largest palm oil producers also support their areas around their estates with the development of schools and with the development of hospitals and whatnot that are uplifting for the complete ecosystem around them. To this end, we know that there have been, specifically for palm oil, a set of robust certification schemes. So we recognize that there's MSPO by Malaysia, ISPO by Indonesia, RSPO that is more driven as an element by Europe and the West, and ISCC. As such, the idea behind starting this global framework on sustainability was not to upend any of these sustainability, any of the certification schemes. But in fact, what we've realized as we were working through it is that what is lacking is a common language across these certification schemes. And often what we find, there is friction when we discuss across countries between, do we follow the ISPO or do we follow the MSPO or RSPO or whatnot. This is why the Global Framework on Sustainability for Palm Oil is focused on creating this common language or a framework to allow for the right discussion across the certification schemes, across countries that have not yet adopted the specific certification schemes, and across the elements even beyond palm oil itself. The idea is that we're able to use this common language to become a lot more productive in the discussion around this very important issue, and to use it as a way to drive towards much better solutions as opposed to some of the friction that we're used to in this topic. Now, what do we use as a base from this element? The elements that we use as a base from this element are the SDGs. Why do we use the SDGs? We use the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because they are already a common language. And they are further recognized by the UN and further recognized by each, by each country that is such. We feel that this is a great way to create this common language, to create this common framework, to allow us to actually engage in these conversations around productivity. We believe that the SDGs represent a set of global goals to which we are all working, as was mentioned earlier, whether you are focusing on it from the country perspective, the industry, the company, or the individual. And this global framework principles should be measured holistically against those SDGs. And in fact, going beyond the 13 elements of SDGs that we've discussed before, and trying to actually encompass as many SDGs as we actually can. The idea then is that palm oil specifically lights the way, if you will, and drives forward that discussion around how do we talk about sustainability and SDGs, and how do we actually focus on looking at productivity and sustainability across not only palm oil, but across the whole set of vegetable sectors. This is extremely important to allow us to have an unbiased discussion about how to provide the right calories, the right sustenance for the population that it keeps growing, while keeping our planet as sustainable as possible for future generations. Now, so how did we do this? The idea to build it was to base on a set of principles, to create these principles, if you will. First of all, we wanted to look forward, not with a new certification scheme as we discussed earlier, but
If you lost your voice. Asif, I think you can turn off your screen.
Across the different parties, different states, establish a set of common denominators. Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry, hello?
Yes,
can you hear
me
now? Is this better?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Yes, sorry about that. Sometimes we have connectivity issues. So as such, what are the principles that were created? One is we want to look forward, not as a new certification scheme, but as a common language across all certification schemes without appending them, as we discussed. Secondly, focusing on the establishment of common denominators across all of these certification schemes, trying to look for commonality, again, as a way to look forward and as a way to create a better discussion around these schemes and around how do we collectively achieve productivity. Thirdly, focusing on the creation of productive partnerships, and specifically not discriminating against palm oil only. As we know, palm oil as calorie per hectare is somewhat more productive, in fact, a lot more productive than some of the other vegetable oils. And as we've seen a bit earlier with the graph, the need, and we'll discuss a bit later as well, the need for the calories that to supply for the population will require a lot more land if we don't use palm oil as such. So therefore, we have to measure palm oil across other vegetable oils as well. Then we look for actionable ways in which the whole industry, producers and consumers, can improve productive sustainability. And we look at new sets of technologies and new sets of approaches to allow for that. We ensure that these opportunities for improvement are identified and ultimately followed on for. And then finally, we want to repeat again that these are principles and approaches, not actions, but rather aspirations and discussion points, because we do believe that one, the whole industry and also the sovereign countries themselves should be able to chart their way as they pursue this very important goal of sustainability. So which principles did we end up with as such? There are 7 such principles. The first one being developing the Partnership for Sustainable Development towards transparency, collaboration, and specifically looking at including other vegetable oils with this framework. 2, upholding peace, justice, and strong institutions through compliance with laws and regulation. And really within this, ensuring that the countries, the producing countries, are able to lead the charge in driving these kind of regulations and laws. 3, investing in innovation and technology to drive the adoption of efficient and best management practices. As we've done the research, we've seen that ultimately with the new technologies around seed, GIS, and other such elements, it is much easier today to ensure that palm oil is sustainable compared, for example, to the last 20 or so years. 4, looking at minimizing the net impact to the environment and ecosystem through the efficient use of natural resources, which is paramount to keeping up and upholding the spirits of sustainability. 5, benefiting workers and local communities by improving their living conditions and respecting their rights, which is important to ensure that no one is actually mistreated in the production of palm oil. 6, inclusiveness for smallholders and low-income consumers. Notice that we take in this approach both ends of the value chain. We focus on smallholders first because, as we realize, they are often the ones that carry most of the burden of sustainability without getting the right return on that. But we also care about the low-income consumers, ensuring that they can actually access the needed product without having to pay too much. And then ultimately, of course, commitment to continuous improvement, because what we are proposing here is not actually an end-all be-all, but is rather a path towards more and better improvements over time. The document, the 7 principles, are followed by 9 annexes that further expand on some of these topics. 1, comparison of this framework and how it aligns to existing certification schemes, keeping within the spirit and what you will see a bit later, that these certification schemes all already contain large amount of what the principles are talking about already. 2, looking at how these sets of principles will better interact with the SDGs. 3, looking at how technology, both digital, around mobile payments and other things, as well as agronomical around better seeds and whatnot, can help improve the sustainability of palm oil. We then look at high-level implementation of how we could actually implement this as such, and the business model design, because we want to ensure that sustainability is not a costly endeavor, but rather something that benefits the whole industry. We further then look at how do we extrapolate this framework into other vegetable oils and the importance of applying this framework to other vegetable oils to achieve the right goals of sustainability, how we then will engage with smallholders, and how we engage with the United Nations. This is super important, as was mentioned by Pa Agus Prabowo earlier, that we do align what we are doing here, what CPOPC is doing here, as alongside what the UN is looking to do in promoting the sustainability elements quite more profusely. And ultimately, we've also prepared a template for new countries looking to form their own national certification scheme that tying back into these elements in the GFP SPO. As an example here of some of the annexes, we wanted to again reassure you that in fact the various certification scheme, all 4 of them, actually tie very well into the various principles of GFP SPO. And the idea there is that GFP SPO actually both connects some of these things, but also closes some of the gaps if some of the certification schemes have yet or are approaching some of these as well. And as you see, all of the 7 principles are actually covered across these various certification schemes. We will not expand because the discussion of new technologies can be more than the time that we have for this, for the full actual webinar. But the 3 key elements around the technologies to look at is, one is the right verification for all stakeholders. And that is specifically addressing how do we lower the cost of verification of sustainability for those stakeholders that cannot afford to engage in very expensive audit mechanisms. 2, remote engagement guidance towards sustainability practices as well as compensation. What we've seen is that today you can actually reward farmers directly for their practices of sustainability and practices with the likes of e-wallets and other such microtransaction elements to allow them the right return for all of the efforts they're putting in, and ultimately the right modern inputs and practices that by itself can increase the yields of palm oil and meet demand without needing significant more land. All of that is covered in the document. When we look at business model exploration, this is where we really do need and call, if possible, on the support by producers as well as by consumers. In fact, there was a study that came out last year that just identified that the smallholder produces $17 billion of the revenues for the industry, or 6% of the value chain, but their profit is actually close to 0. However, the downstream, the consumer companies actually generate 66% of the gross profit and 52% of the operating profit. And in fact, if they were to look at really helping directly by lowering the transaction cost of helping the smallholders, we could achieve 0 deforestation in quite a remarkable way. Therefore, we contend that business models should support smallholders, making sure that it doesn't increase the undue burden on them, improving the efficiencies in the value chain, sponsored by downstream players, and utilizing digital efficiency to ensure that this connection exists. Notice we are not mentioning in this document traceability and transparency, but ultimately that is actually what we are striving for. Today, with the right technology, we can achieve that quite easily and in a very cost-efficient way. Finally, we want to ensure that palm oil, as we mentioned, leads the way alongside other vegetable oils. We should not be content with the fact that there is one specific vegetable oil that is often held to a very different standard than other vegetable oils. In fact, we do know that if we do need to supply the 35.7 million hectares in order to meet the projected demand in 2050, it would only mean about 8% of increase in land use. On the other hand, soybean oil, if we were to try to use that to meet the same demand, will require 48% land use instead. This is why we do hope that this today is a start of a discussion to allow us to work for better sustainable palm oil to both meet the demand and do it in a much more sustainable way. Thank you very much.